Okay, good morning, everyone. So Andy asked me to share the podium with Sandy this morning's plenary to share what the ExxonMobil's vision for process control in the downstream and the chemicals businesses is, and also to explain our contract with Lockheed Martin. And it's kind of interesting. The typical introduction, they talk about where you went to school, what awards have you gotten. So Andy's already given most of my talk, and if I were lazy, I would stop here and say, are there any questions? But I'm not going to do that because it's a rich and we think a pretty thrilling story. And what I'm going to do with a few minutes this morning in the plenary is really introduce the big picture. Steve Batar is going to go into the details tomorrow afternoon in the workshop, and our boss, Carol Eit, is going to be in the executive panel discussion tomorrow morning. So on behalf of Steve, the R&D team, and myself, please be sure to tell Carol we're doing a great job. Okay. All right, let's get to work here. Okay, so let me start by saying, what is the problem that we're trying to solve in our program? So the motivation for this research program that started in 2010 in ExxonMobil's breakthrough R&D portfolio. So this is where we tackle the high return, high risk opportunities. That's where this got started. The business problem was our need to replace a significant percentage of our regulatory control equipment over the next 10 years. That was the real motivating business problem. But as we progressed, we also want to address the business problem that Sandy articulated brilliantly. How can we take cost out of the projects that we need to do to deliver process control systems, particularly in our greenfield facilities? Another difference in the business problem that we're trying to solve for downstream and chemicals is this replacement activity presents a finite window of time opportunity. Okay, so we have to be very aggressive with respect to schedule expectations, as opposed to a context where, as long as innovation keeps happening on a continuous stream of projects, we can integrate it. So our business challenge is one that's characterized by a finite time window of opportunity. So what's wrong with the status quo? And this block of words in the middle of the slide here is one articulation of what's wrong with the status quo. I want to make it even simpler. So this R&D started with really two basic assertions or two hypotheses to be tested. Hypothesis number one, it's too difficult, it's too expensive for us to upgrade or replace control systems. Why? What can we do to solve that problem? The second of the assertions or hypotheses to be tested is that we're not getting enough value from the control system. And let me offer as evidence of that hypothesis the fact that over the last 20 years or so, the majority of plus value applications for us in our world has been delivered with solutions that we deployed at the level of the computing stack above the DCS, in the Purdue model, what you'd call level 3. This is an unequivocal fact. So these are statements that assert that there's a motivation to improve on the status quo. So the other thing that we've done in the conduct of this research is we very purposefully, carefully, and diligently studied outside of our little world. We looked very carefully at what was going on in adjacent industries and what might be applicable in our space. So there's 4 points that are made here. Let me verbalize them and restate them. So point number one, we saw really radical improvements through the use of virtualization technologies, but in ways beyond what we're currently using in our industry. And the insights in this dimension came to us by what we saw going on in the telecommunications industry. So technology trend and insight number two, and this makes the connection to Lockheed Martin. We started seeing a few years ago a constructive revolution going on in the avionics industry with the move towards standards-based, open, and interoperable systems. So this is not just a theoretical concept. we are actually seeing it play out in practice. So trend number 3, the innovations with Internet of Things, with wireless, and with cloud, which Andy introduced brilliantly this morning, are really changing the expectations of our management. Honestly, I have vice presidents asking me questions like, well, Don, this Internet of Things stuff and this wireless stuff and this cloud stuff, why do we need control systems anymore? These are not facetious questions. Now, they're easy questions to answer, but the point is, if paths for data keep opening around what we're currently calling the DCS, data is going to find that way. And I would submit to you that if we stay on the technology trend, if we don't think differently, as Sandy is saying, I would submit to you that what we're calling the DCS is going to have a smaller and smaller impact. It just seems fairly obvious to me. And the fourth point here, and some of the innovators are here in this room, we're seeing significant improvements to the technology and the solutions that we use to address the increasing need for security. And Sandy articulated very, very colorfully, we're going to have a security system that does some control. We have to do something beyond just slapping more firewalls, more whitelisting. We need to take a more fundamental approach. So this is our motivation. So at last year's ARC forum, I communicated what we call our functional characteristics of the system that we would like to have. And let me start the story by just picking a couple of points out of the blue box. So functionally, we want a system that, and I'm going to jump a little bit out of order here a little bit, significantly lowers the cost of future replacement. I already highlighted that. Number 4, preserves the asset owner's application software. Okay, why do we have to rewrite application code to port an application across platforms spatially, across our facilities, if they happen to use different hardware? Why? Why do we have to rewrite our application software to port an application from one generation of a system to the next generation? Why? We want to get out of that trap. Point number 6, employs an adaptive security model, okay? Technologies that are built in rather than bolted on. And finally, the last point I'm going to highlight is the point number 1, promotes innovation and value creation. How do we enable more value generation from what we're calling the control system? So to summarize in a phrase, what our vision is for a standards-based, open, secure, and interoperable control system. Some additional characteristics of what we're shooting for. Okay, the system shall be applicable in both brownfield and greenfield facilities. Our vision is very consistent with the one that you heard from Sandy. I mean, honestly, and with all humility and openness, we're very grateful. Sandy's team has really blazed trails here, and we have incorporated a lot of that thinking, certainly a lot of know-how from Sandy's team into the team in ExxonMobil Research and Engineering that are doing this work. So to give you some specific examples of where there's like one-to-one correspondence, right? There's no relaxation of requirements for safety, security, reliability. No compromises there. But other things like the smart configurable I/O, completely coherent and consistent with our vision. In fact, on this dimension, we want to extend the concept a little bit further. But the diced concept, for example, automatic detect, identify, configure, and document. One-to-one correspondence between our visions. Finally, not finally, but most importantly, our goal is a commercially available system. Okay, we are not looking for an ExxonMobil-only solution. This is not, for us to work on an ExxonMobil-only solution for a control system is just not sustainable. So we are striving towards the development and innovation that's going to lead to something that is commercially available for all willing participants. And a final point here, this is really a point I want to make for the supplier community. I mean, the way I view the world is we're trying to expand the addressable market space by expanding this potential scope of applications. So I don't see the world as a zero-sum game of diminishing incremental returns. What we're really trying to do is think differently, bring a different approach to solving the problem, and one that results in a pro-competitive expansion of market opportunities. This is the way that I see the world. Now, the next slide is going to have a reference architecture. And before I flash that up, because this is what really gets the engineers going, not so much concepts, is when they see pictures of a diagram, an architecture or a system. But I want to introduce the human dimension of the story. You know, innovation in a big, successful company is a very difficult thing to do. And so if any of you have read Clayton Christensen's books, The Innovator's Dilemma, for example, I think can relate to what I'm talking about. So how do you get experts in their field who think that what they've got is just can't be perfected on? How do you get innovation to happen in that context? Well, Steve was facing this problem, and what he did brilliantly in early 2014, he pulled aside about a half a dozen of our most imaginative engineers, gave them a safe space, and said, define the future state that you'd like to have. And we supplemented that team with 2 highly experienced independent consultants, very knowledgeable in our field. And that team, in a span of about 6 to 9 months or so, produced 3 documents. One was a case for action. The second was a narrative of the functional characteristics, which is what I presented here last year and what's represented on this page. And the third document that we really were very reluctant to share because we did not want to bias the creativity of the potential suppliers was a reference architecture. So this next slide is a reference architecture, and the way I'd like to position this story is this is a potential way to deliver the functional characteristics that we're asking for. And I want to highlight 4 attributes of the reference architecture. Attribute number 1, and this is what's depicted in the yellow boxes. So attribute number 1 is the DCN nodes, which stands for distributed control nodes there on the bottom left. Briefly, we envision, so this would be the analogs to the smart configurable I/O devices, but what we would like to have is at least some degree of basic regulatory control capability in those nodes with high availability, peer-to-peer communications among those distributed control nodes, and such that the connection between the DCN and the computer control layer is software defined. Attribute number 1. Attribute number 2 is the concept of what's depicted there as the real-time service bus. So this is to be an open industry standard accessible to all participants who comply with the standard as the means to effect communication among the nodes in the system. Attribute number 3, the yellow box in the upper left, which we call the real-time advanced control platform. This is where we expect to see virtualization employed in ways that we haven't done so to date. I think a lot of us have fallen into the trap. When we say virtualization, we mean Microsoft OS-based VMs. We are thinking differently here. How can we virtualize things that we currently instantiate with purpose-built hardware in ways that do not compromise our security or availability requirements? This is the scale of our thinking. The 4th attribute, I guess we haven't figured out a way to visualize it yet, but the point is the security features are built in intrinsically into the system, into those yellow functions, and into the interfaces between the legacy devices depicted in blue and the new system components that are depicted in yellow. Okay, so I want to come back to the human dimension of the story. I've already talked about our activities to write functional characteristics. I want to pick up the story with Lockheed Martin. So why did we introduce Lockheed Martin into the picture? Reason number 1, we realized that we needed to supplement our internal capabilities for systems design engineering. Okay, so that was a conscious decision that we just needed, more expertise, more capability, more horsepower to help us with some of these systems engineering challenges. Even as a user company, we felt that need. And we'd actually been just through our due diligence, we had actually been monitoring, talking to Lockheed Martin on a low level for a couple of years, going back to, I think, early 2013. But the second real reason for introducing Lockheed Martin was what we saw embodied in this Future Airborne Capability Environment Consortium. And let me highlight, Dennis Stevens is way more equipped to tell this story than I am, but let me just highlight the things that really were appealing to us. So this is not simply a standards-setting body, this consortium. This consortium started in 2010 with the establishment of like a business framework that resulted in wins for the participants. Wins for the suppliers, wins for the systems integrators, wins for the customers, wins for the users. So it's built on a really sound business basis that, again, lets the participants win. Secondly, the FACE Consortium is not a standards setting or creating body. The principle there is to simply use the existing standards and just pick the ones that work rather than creating a new standard. That's attribute number 2 that's very appealing. Attribute number 3 that's very appealing is that the consortium was built from the beginning with a validation and certification process for components to assure compliance. Dennis tells me compliance is the wrong word. Dennis, what's the right word? Conformance. Conformance with the standard, all right, so that customers can purchase solutions that conform to the standard. And it's this combination of technical and commercial ecosystem that is really appealing to us as what we'd like to have in the future state. So that's the rationale for Lockheed Martin, and so far so good. We're just completely pleased with how things are going. So as Andy mentioned earlier today, so in January 14th, we published the press release, and January 26th, we had the Industry Day in Bethesda, Maryland. So we pulled it off 2 days after a 2-foot snowfall in Washington, D.C. 25 companies showed up, like 90% of our 90% of the registrants, and I think the 10% who didn't show up simply couldn't get there because of the weather. So that was our outreach to the supplier community. And what I'm trying to do, what the ExxonMobil team is trying to do today with our appearance here at this ARC forum, we want to reconnect with this audience, bring you up to speed from the message that we sent last year. But the other thing we're trying to accomplish this year is we really want to test the users' appetites for this future state that we are envisioning here, that we're offering for your consideration. So I'm going to close with a call for action. So hold that thought for a minute. So okay, grand vision notwithstanding, what are you going to do right now? Okay, so this is the next steps in 2015, specifically with respect to the Lockheed Martin initiative. So the request for informations, submissions, responses from the suppliers are due back to Lockheed Martin by February 26th, and I think we're going to relax that date to the 29th. We received way more qualifying questions than I certainly anticipated. So after eliminating the duplicates, we still had 73 qualifying questions to answer from the participants of Industry Day. So Dennis, Steve, and I, and our teams, we finished answering all those questions last night, and I think the RFI and the answers to the qualifying questions are going out today. So the RFI responses are due back February 29th, I think. I'm going to reverse order of these bullets here. Our goal for 2016 is to build a lab prototype. And we're going to issue requests for proposals for contributions towards that lab prototype. I think the RFPs will probably go out in the April type of time frame, but we expect that the RFP responses will be due in May. Now let me go beyond 2016 here in terms of the timeline. What we would like to have is a technically ready solution to our business problem in 2018 with a solution that's fit for purpose for deployment in the field in 2019. This is our goal. We know it's a stretch. Most of the people that I talk to tell me it's impossible. Many people tell me it's possible. Many powerful and knowledgeable people tell me it's possible. We are trying. This is our stretch goal. So let me wrap up with the summary. This is a pretty short talk. I've told you what our business problem is, and I've tried to make it clear what's unique about our business problem that complements the story that Sandy told. Maybe the innovation that we're bringing to the industry is bringing new participants, new perspectives in from the outside. The explicit references to adjacent industries, the partnering with Lockheed Martin, maybe that's the real innovation here, is the different approach to the problem. So what I'd like to have happen as a result of our presence here at the 2016 ARC Forum are summarized in the 2 bullets on the bottom here. And this is a call for action. So first thing, can I ask my ExxonMobil colleagues to stand? Okay, and Dennis Stevens from Lockheed Martin, can I ask you to stand? Okay, so my expected outcome is that you attendees, you really want to understand what our motivation and vision is and map it to what the opportunity for your company is. I want to leave this ARC Forum, the 2016, with everybody understanding these points. And the specific, we've already started to engage with the supplier community. So the call to the users, to prospective users, if you're interested in this, if you're interested in participating, we don't know exactly what form. I'm not smart enough to know what form of participation is going to be. So all we're doing is soliciting for interest at this time, and this is the point that Andy made in his opening remarks. Just let us know that you're interested. A couple of guys I was talking to yesterday suggested to me, well, Don, why don't you have an industry day for the users? That's a great idea. We might do something like that. So as you go through the conference the next couple of days, please reach out to me, to Steve, to Carol, my ExxonMobil colleagues, Dennis Stevens, and we'll be happy to share this information, this vision with you. Thank you very much.